So gaming's huge. I mean, we're talking about the largest entertainment sector, bigger than film, bigger than TV, bigger than music, 2.8 billion people across the world, maybe even a bit more. So we're seeing a third of all adult users in gaming spaces seeing white supremacist content fairly regularly. So there's also intensified misogynistic, homophobic, and in some spaces also violent jihadist content as well. There is a intensified sense of violent extremist content being weaponized and used in the social spaces around gaming, that if we want to grapple with as a society how that's influencing massive sea changes in the use of extremist attacks, we really need to understand that space better, and we can't ignore it. Contemporary games for especially younger audiences, that's an entire social world, right? And it's not different between the real world and the virtual world. There's no difference there anymore. They're permeable spaces. What happens online and offline all blends together. So the social interactions that happen in online multiplayer games are every bit as real as the social interactions that happen in offline spaces too. One are the design of bespoke video games modifications, and that can either happen from the bottom up or the top down. So if you're a neo-Nazi in your basement and you like to play Doom, and you make a modification of Doom that turns it into a version of the Pulse nightclub shooting, or you turn it into a version of a different set of anti-Semitic shooters, like that's one thing, right? That's kind of people designing their own thing that are hate-filled and extremist, but not necessarily organized by a group. Then on the other side, the top down, Hezbollah has designed their own like very well-produced first-person shooters that are exceptionally well-produced and well-curated and show a very sophisticated level of game design inside of them. So that's using game-like elements outside of the game. So leaderboards, point-ranking systems. If you go on far-right forums, you'll find ranking for different far-right shooters and perpetrators. And then you also find the live streaming of attacks, right? So the use of live stream platforms, often popular with video gamers, with esports stars, to live stream an act of terror. And you often use video game elements inside of that. So in the case of the Buffalo attacker, you use helmet cam footage that looks like as a first-person shooter. You add in Easter eggs to the content for viewers to find. You're exchanging with your viewers as you're killing people. And then you're using that entire gamified approach to drive user engagement, like you would with a good digital strategy. And then people go behind the scenes, record it, broadcast that content elsewhere. So even if the platform gets rid of it, you still have that content archived elsewhere that millions more people can view. And then you have people creating games on the back of it. So you have recreations of that attack being built into actual games that you can play. So you have kind of a multi-pronged digital strategy that emerges out of that. I encourage people to think of these as communities, right? And community norms vary tremendously from a classroom to the street to the pub to the boxing ring, right? Like the community norms of what's acceptable in that space vary massively. Often you have a wider ecosystem of things that are designed for gamers, but that aren't actually the game. So simple stuff can be Discord, which started out as an online audio chat that would also have a text component that would run alongside your game in the background, so you could talk with people in the same game as you. It since has grown into a massive service globally for communication. We also have stuff like Steam, which are the platforms where you can buy games, but Steam also functions as a social network. But you also have kind of the darker sides of this. You have Chan boards, places like 4chan or 8kun or Kiwi Farms, that often have dedicated gaming portions to otherwise like very fringe servers that can have a lot of problematic content, often a lot of far-right content, and also have a gaming component to them. If you're younger, you're online, maybe you're feeling a little bit like, have a great sense of who you are. You're feeling a bit lonely, a bit isolated. You find a sense of community. Maybe that's in a really positive one, or maybe that's in a user community that is extremely racist and extremely misogynistic. So all it takes then, once you're in that immediate community, is you start going down the algorithmic rabbit hole and you start searching for more like-minded content. And you find it gradually reinforces itself over time. Right? If we talk about an audience funnel, you're trying to convert people through to the sale. In this case, you're trying to sell an ideology. You might design a game that starts with a World War II simulator, except you're playing as the Nazis. So you bring people in, people are playing a game, they're exchanging, and then you might start making a few jokes inside of that, of an anti-Semitic nature. You look for people who react to them. You don't start with a hard pedal sell, right? You see people who seem like they're on the same side as you. Then maybe you bring them into another site. You say, hey, maybe you'd like to join my chat server. So you bring people over to Discord. You start to exchange a sense of community, and then you start injecting in more ideas from your ideology. Then as you begin to bring people more into that closed setting, you intensify group identity. Often you start playing together more. You start playing the same games together more. And you intensify that sense of a strong group identity. And as you build that identity more and more and more, you're much more likely to do anything for that group, right? You bring them into encrypted spaces for the actual planning and orchestration of an attack or of a protest or whatever it might be that you're planning. So there's kind of different platforms and different channels that you use depending on the type of communication and engagement that you want to have. So you can shape positive experiences in online settings as well. So there's some game studios that have tried to bring in a lot of behavioral scientists to think through how do you nudge behavior inside of games to make it less toxic. Turns out there's ways to do that. It's not perfect, but you can design better community norms and standards when people are engaged in really toxic behavior to try and bring them into thinking through their behavior and changing the community's acceptance of that. So we call this like combating bystander effect. So when you can actually gradually shift how people engage online for the better. So two things that I think hold huge promise there. One is safety by design practices, so actually trying to design games and online environments with the safety of the user in mind from the beginning, so actually building the product around that. Two are doing positive interventions, so actually working to change online community norms and behaviors, or designing pragmatic strategic communications work that engages with games, that engages with gamer communities, right? Using things like live streaming and esports stars to talk about difficult issues. And you can also use games as a form of narrative and storytelling to tell positive stories on the back of other campaigns or other educational experiences. So there's a lot of kind of positive and interesting spaces for using games for good and creating these inclusive, exciting, fun spaces, which is what games should be. They should be fun, they should be joyful, and they should be a place where you find a sense of community. The number one thing that I'd say to start with is like, play some games, right? So actually get into these communities a bit. And if you don't want to play games yourself, get to know some gamers who understand these spaces well. If you're trying to do an intervention in these spaces, you better understand the cultural cues, the language, how people are engaging with these spaces, and work with gamers themselves, right? Like so many people don't want to see the toxicity or the manipulation of gaming spaces by white supremacists, right? So there's loads of gamers who don't want that. So work with them, bring them into the fold and say, how, if I was trying to design a positive intervention in a specific game to try and push back against white supremacist or neo-Nazi content or violent jihadist content in a different corner of the internet, how would I do that, right? Don't just build a game and then see what happens, right? Please don't do that. Not to say that there's not a room for games in these spaces, there are, but the cultural nuances of storytelling and of narrative really matter here. And the same with like mental health-based interventions for games. There's tremendous space to improve the mental health of gamers and work on preventing, vulnerabilities in that space too, but get it right. So work with gamers, educators, game designers, developers, and bring in people from spaces who have been looking at this stuff for a long time, and then join that up with the broader questions of extremism prevention work or of countering violent extremism. For practitioners who are working on this now, there are great things that can happen today if you think a little bit outside of the box and you start to bring in the conversations and communication avenues that gaming and gaming adjacent platforms offer for good.